Okay, welcome and good evening to the Institute for the Danube region in Central Europe here in Vienna, Alsergrund. My name is Sebastian Schäffer. I am Managing Director of IDM, and I have the great pleasure to not only welcome you here in this seminar room, but also our other distinguished guests online for this discussion. And before I introduce our panel, I would like to hand over to Daniela Urschitz, who is a member of the IDM board, and she will set the stage. Daniela.
Thank you, Sebastian. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's panel discussion. 1 year to go, European Parliamentary Elections 2024, what themes and narratives, organized by the IDM and Sebastian Schäffer. My name is Daniela Urschitz. I'm a member, as you heard, of the IDM board, and I've been working with and for and in the European Union for almost 40 years. And I was invited to make a few introductory remarks to Sebastian set the stage of our discussion. Europe has been facing a situation of polycrisis for almost a generation now, and is now confronted to a war with far-reaching economic, political, financial, and societal consequences, while the disaster of climate change is looming large. We are all living in a period of great uncertainty and transformation. But the growing group of citizens is feeling, and actually is being, left behind by national governments, and even more so by the faceless, foreign, faraway ruler, the European Union. Promises of a better life for all Europeans have often been left unfulfilled, and popular frustration is, of course, growing. In the wake of these developments, rule of law, respect for democracy, equality, human rights, freedom, as well as European policies, do not win votes anymore in a growing number of European countries. Actually, I find it amazing that at the last European elections, the turnout was just about 50%. If Europeans are not interested or not trusting enough to vote in an election, the results of which will impact us greatly, it is difficult to imagine how they will engage in the years to follow. Moreover, in 2024, a large group of citizens will vote for the first time. If the European Union is unable to interest its youth in the European project, to give them hope and trust in a shared future, failure is predictable. Roberta Metsola, President of the European Parliament, said in her speech to the Austrian Parliament, I think a week ago, May 25th, I cite from her speech, "We need to do a better job at explaining the value of Europe, and I have made it my mandate to speak to people in towns, villages, and schools across our union, listening and learning. We have to better explain why and how we can do the transition towards a sustainable economy and why this matters. I have been told recently that there is an invisible line that people cannot be pushed beyond. People must have confidence in the process, and they must be able to afford it. Otherwise, it will not succeed." Well, this is nothing but the triple truth. And the Conference for the Future of Europe was trying to do just that, to reach out to its and to listen to its citizens through panels and conferences. However, I'm not alone to think that change well beyond that classical exercise in citizen participation will be necessary for a real democratic change in Europe. At the end of the day, national governments are still in charge of the implementation of policy recommendations, and democratic deterioration went on while the conference was working, or shall I say, while the Congress was dancing. Therefore, I wonder what can be achieved before people cross the invisible line and the European project is irretrievably damaged. This brings me back to the institute of which I'm proud to be a member of the board. It's small, it's independent, it's constantly fighting for money, and every year, through tireless networking and sharing of ideas and know-how, it brings together hundreds of decision makers and researchers at international conferences, in European projects, as IDM interns, working for democratic, inclusive, participative, pro-European perspective. What we need is a lot more of that kind of work, a lot more of sustainable projects that work on the ground, promoting European values and cooperation. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Sebastian, it's your turn.
Thank you, Daniela. Well, this is, of course, now a huge task to fulfill what you have said that we are doing. And I'm especially proud that we have brought together this wonderful, distinguished panel, and that we managed to bring you together exactly 1 year before the European parliamentary elections will take place. And this is why our event is called 1 Year to Go, EP Elections 2024, What Themes and Narratives. It's part of a EU-funded project that we are implementing together with Bilčik in Bratislava, the European movement in Ireland, and Eliamet in Greece. Today's event partner is also the Political Academy of the European People's Party. And I'm especially happy that we have 3 members of the European Parliament joining us from 3 different countries in Central Europe. And we have some sort of Slavkov or Austerlitz format that we brought together coincidentally. And I'm very happy that we have with us, I'll start in the room, in this case, forgive me, Lukas Mandl, who is a member of the Austrian People's Party, a chair of the delegations for the relations with the Korean Peninsula, a vice chair of the Subcommittee on Security and Defense, and a member of the vice chair of the Assembly of the European Regions. He's also a member of the Conference of Delegation Chairs of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. Lukas, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We have online with us Markéta Gregorová. She is a member of the Czech Pirate Party, who is a member of the European Free Alliance and the Green Group. And her main topics deal with the protection of human rights, mainly also the Transcaucasian countries and Russia, the future of warfare and hybrid threats. She's a vice chair of the delegation to the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly and a member of the Committee on International Trade, the Subcommittee on Security and Defense, the Special Committee on Foreign Interference in Democratic Processes in the EU, and a member of the delegation to the EU-Armenia Parliamentary Partnership Committee. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, we have with us Vladimir Bilčik, who is also a member of the European People's Party. His main topics are EU institutions, EU foreign policy, Slovak, German, and before politics, as well as most recently also Brexit. He's the chair of the delegation to the EU Montenegro Stabilization and Association Parliamentary Committee and a member on the Conference of Delegation Chairs, Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, the delegation to the EU North Macedonia Joint Parliamentary Committee. Thank you very much as well for joining us.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everyone in Vienna.
So we asked you to, in the very beginning, let us know what is actually the topics that, and also narratives that you are expecting to shape the next EP elections in your country, but also how different and similar this might be in the other countries. And if you don't mind, I would also start here with Lukas in the room.
Thank you again for having me, and thanks for organizing this very timely discussion a few days and a year ahead of this parliamentary election. Happy to see you colleagues also on the screen here from Vienna. Vlado, my intelligence goes as far as I can see you are in Brussels. I know the background, and I just flew in from Brussels to my home capital here in Vienna. And I state it with the term of parliamentary elections because this is in the first place what it is about. And I, let's say, recommend to read political developments, political events as what they are meant to be in the first place. And it's an election of 705 representatives who will be meant to represent less than 400 Europeans for 5 years from 2024 to 2029. So this is what it will be about, and this is also why I appreciate that you have also emphasized in your question what the people will care about in the different countries, because Austria, for example, is one constituency. Many EU member states form one constituency. Some are split into several constituencies like Italy and others. But generally, the whole idea of parliamentarism is that people would be represented by representatives who would be elected for a specific defined period of time. That's what Sir Karl Popper always says about democracy, always said that this limited time frame is one of the clear definitions of what democracy is about. And this is how we should see it. And now the question is, what will people concern? That's what I understand from your question. We all know this old quote of an advisor to Bill Clinton, if I'm rightly informed, that it would be the economy stupid. That's the quote. And this might be true also in these times in a broader sense. So we have inflation, we have a lack of skilled workers, a lack of workers at all, especially in Austria, but all over Europe. Also inflation, we have all over Europe, but Austrians are very concerned of it. It might change in a year. A year is a very long period of time in politics generally, but there might be some issues which will remain important for the voters, but to remain not too theoretically. It will be a question of information, of sharing knowledge, to connect the dots. That inflation or lack of workers would be connected. Inflation would be connected to the war, which was mentioned by Ms. Urschitz in her speech, and to other factors, of course. And lack of workers would be connected to our labor market conditions, as well as to education issues, as well as to demographic issues, as well as to the question of the global competition on skilled workers. So things would be connected, and to connect the dots and to present the public with that, and to offer, let's say, this complexity in order to put voters in the position to take a decision will be important. And the last point, maybe populism will be around. Populism will increase. So this is the downside of everything, and maybe we should focus also on this aspect, because otherwise we're only talking theoretically, academically, among like-minded people of goodwill, which are gathered here, I'm confident. But populism of the far left and far right, or whatever you want to call it, it's not easy to distinguish anymore, will, let's say there will at least be a risk of increasing populism. And so, not to be too long, I will stop here, but maybe we will focus on that. Also, my colleagues, I can imagine, will focus on that.
Thank you very much. How would Markéta Gregorová describe the situation in Czechia, but also in relation to that, what has been mentioned?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I do hope that it won't sound too pessimistic, but I will try to be as realistic as possible. So if we are talking about, sorry, Heidi is actually calling me. So if we are talking about what narratives and topics will shape the next elections, in particular in Czech Republic, I need to first say that it will be vastly shaped by specific people and specific parties. Of course, voters, citizens do also have some fears or some preferences, but let's say we have very strong PR and marketing spectrum of political parties, and some of them are very capable of setting up the agenda. But first, let me also start with saying that as probably in every country, not only which we will discuss today, but in every European country, the elections to the European Parliament will be influenced by tough decisions and choices that the current governments of the countries had to face during the war in Ukraine, and of course also after the pandemic, and of course, and I will get to it in depth a little bit later regarding the green transformation that Europe started to undergo way back. But we are now facing a lot of the consequences or the choices. So as in a lot of countries, in the Czech Republic, it will be a lot also, let's say, a certificate of satisfaction with the current government and how it faced the challenges. The second part I need to address is that within our country, we had the previous government under the rule of an oligarch, which owns most of the media spectrum in the Czech Republic and also let's say, has enough wealth to support in terms of PR and marketing his campaigning. He has also been addressing mostly populistic issues and is trying to gain the popular vote by downright lying and manipulating the public perception. So there is this current government and its political parties, which is actually 5 political parties, so quite fragile government, which will face, let's say, as I said, the certificate of satisfaction from the citizens. And on the other side, the previous oligarch who owns most of the media environment. So we can assume that most of it will be based on what he assumes as the speaking points. And we can assume those will be mostly 2, which is the Green Deal, of course, as I already mentioned, and related controversial topics, such as the combustion engines fade out, or well, pretty much anything that is related to what will citizens need to probably pay in terms of investment. And unfortunately, I also have to say that in Czechia is very strong migration fear-mongering still. Actually, maybe Vladimir will be able to also confirm that just a couple of months ago, we closed, for instance, our borders with Slovakia to some weeks because of this public fear and, of course, populistic fear of the politicians that it will be unpopular if there are too many migrating people who are not from Ukraine, of course, I mean, who are from other areas of conflict, such as Syria. Also important thing for Czechia is to note the turnout. Again, I will turn to my colleague from Slovakia. Last elections, they were unfortunately the last ones, but we were just in front of them with 24% turnout, 19% turnout the elections before that, so 2014. As you can probably tell, that's a very low turnout. So these elections are elections of oftentimes extremes, of those who really want to support the EU, so they go and vote, or those who really oppose it. Those who are somewhere in the middle, just observe the politics, but don't really have a relationship to European Union and elections, they don't turn out. And then it's decided by which side of the so-called extremes will actually turn out. So those are very important points that I wanted to mention. There was also a question whether it's different to other countries. I don't think it's different in the sense that it's sort of a feedback to the current government, and that important topic will be the Green Deal consequences. I think that will be very much like so for most of the European countries. I just think that the difference is in who will be voicing these topics and how. In Czechia, I do fear that there will be quite a lot of emotions going on and no rationale because of those who will be trying to, let's say, push their point through the narratives. I do hope that this suffices for some introductory remarks, and I will be very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. I think perfectly. And last but not least, again, Vladimir Bilčik, we have heard the certificate of satisfaction with the government. In the case of Slovakia, there will be new elections in Slovakia before the European elections. So this maybe does set the stage a bit differently, and the turnout has already been mentioned. Feel free, please, to also comment on these points additionally to what will be shaping policies in Slovakia.
Well, thank you very much, and a very good evening to my dear colleagues, Lukas Manl, who is in Vienna, and Markéta Gregorová, who is also online, and especially to everyone at Institute für den Donnerraum und Mitteleuropa. I used to collaborate with IDEM in my previous life as an academic, as a think tanker on a number of projects. And I just wish that that sort of spirit, which is also very present in IDEM and goes back to the times and the days of Erhard Buzek, is something which we can reinforce across Central Europe. That's very much needed in these days, which are increasingly dominated by divisive politics, by populism, by attacks and language which often is not European, but rather tries to diminish the role of Europe. And we are increasingly confronted with that across the member states. And that, of course, has consequences also for European politics and the makeup of an institution such as the European Parliament. I also like this Slavko or Austerlitz format. I think it's by coincidence, as you mentioned, Herr Schäfer, but you know, it's also good to show this Central European cooperation in times when perhaps the Visegrad format is not working as well as it should be, in particular because of the situation in Hungary. And I think it's important that the Central Europeans not only work together, but also try to understand their differences. So I welcome this as an opportune moment because, you know, I live about 35 minutes from Švechat airport and use it regularly to come to Brussels. But I also feel that the politics in Slovakia and in Austria are on many levels different, and it's good to know what not only separates us, but also what binds us. Now, you posed the question very rightly, because we will have elections in Slovakia in September. We have parliamentary elections, so we're already campaigning, and it's going to be an extremely challenging election. Extremely challenging because populism is on the rise, and far-right populists and leftist populists, unfortunately, are ready to do quite well in these elections. We already are facing huge disinformation campaigns, which are also fueled by a lot of domestic discourse. And I think this is one of the threats we need to be very much aware of when it comes to also European elections. We need to safeguard the integrity of elections. Elections must be free and fair. And this is not just about what happens on the day of elections, but this is especially what happens in the campaign. And unfortunately, Slovak campaign already is very much full of disinformation about Ukraine and Russia's brutal attack against Ukraine. The recent opinion polls are showing that there is an increasing number of people who no longer believe that Russia is responsible for this war. And this is extremely dangerous and only shows how susceptible we are in our European democracies to outside influence and undue foreign interference. And by the way, this is one of the issues which we have been tackling very closely in the European Parliament. We also, all three of us happen to be in the same committee, which deals with disinformation and foreign interference. And I'm mentioning it here because when we talk about the topics of the elections, I think one of the messages we should be aware of is that we should not let outsiders dictate these topics to us. The Russians, the Chinese, or whoever else wants to interfere with our elections. And this is something which I'm already observing in the Slovak context in the run-up to national elections in September. And of course, we will have presidential elections in Slovakia early next spring. So the European elections will come after important domestic elections in June next year. And I'm afraid that might also affect the turnout. Markéta is very right that historically Slovakia is the one country which has always had the lowest turnout ever since we joined the EU and held European elections. Now, I was part of the winning coalitions in the last elections, and we managed to raise the turnout from some 13% back in 2014 to over 23% in 2019. I hope we can still do better in next year's elections in June. But of course, much will depend on the domestic context. And if you ask me today what is going to define the Slovak elections over a year from now, if I give you an honest answer, it is, I have no idea. I really have no idea because the politics moves so quickly and the topics of the day change so swiftly, depending on how the different issues are framed in public discourse, that we don't really know what is going to decide the elections in our respective countries, if I may say humbly. However, what we know is how to best prepare so these elections are as free as fair as possible, and best prepare that we know what sort of agenda we want to present and how we want to approach the voters. And here I agree with Lucas that probably a lot of bread and butter issues will be on the agenda. But I think with European elections, especially in countries with low turnout, such as mine, but also the Czech Republic, and I know Austria's turnout is higher, but is not among the highest as well. A lot is about mobilization. A lot is about participation. A lot is about explaining to people why Europe matters, why Europe is a game changer, why they should care about who sits in the European Parliament, why it matters for their lives. I think this is one of the big tasks we had ahead for us as politicians. And there is so much we can draw on in terms of this current mandate. Really, Europe has been a game changer when it comes to facing the pandemic. Europe has been a game changer when it comes to facing Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine. You know, imagine several years ago discussing the fact that now we procuring jointly arms, which, you know, I know is probably a very sensitive issue in a neutral country such as Austria, but quite frankly and realistically, politically, there is no such thing as a neutral country in this war. Institutionally, perhaps, but politically, certainly no. And I think there is so much that Europe has shown we can give and provide for people with our decisions, that this is something we need to be able to bring to the people in the run-up to the European elections. We played a crucial role during the pandemic and the procurement of vaccines. We played a crucial role also in the aftermath with the recovery and reconstruction plan and unique financing, which is based on basically joint European bonds, let's be honest, in terms of how we are financing this RRF plans. Right now with a decisive response, joint common European response with respect to our support for Ukraine, which is now a candidate status for EU membership, Slovakia's immediate neighbor. And this is very good news for us geopolitically. And of course, we continue to face Russia's brutal aggression. And I think we also what happened today in Ukraine with the explosion of a huge dam, which could be a game changer in this conflict, and which clearly shows that there is a terrorist regime in Moscow, and we need to be ready to confront this. So none of us, the Austrians, the Czechs, the Slovaks, could face these challenges alone. None of us can alone safeguard the integrity of our elections, and none of us can be sure that we are the ones who are setting the agenda. We need to be jointly focused on making the elections really a celebration of democracy, and bring our agenda to the campaign and to the voters before the elections. This is what I think we need to focus on and be quite aware what is at stake. What's at stake is the future of the European project if more populists win. What's at stake is that someone may really undermine the elections just the way they did it, for instance, back in the UK, when a lot of Brexiteers also entered the European Parliament. So for me, this is going to be about a genuine fight for Europe, for pro-European voices, for making sure that people really mobilize around Europe and European responses to the challenges we are facing. Already the keynote speaker at the introduction said very clearly, Europe has been in one big polycrisis for years, and this is not going to go away. And I hope we can provide some answers. Maybe one last point, and this is interesting, and maybe I'll just raise it as a point for discussion. Nobody has mentioned kind of the boring institutional aspect of this, but what we are voting for in these elections is also who is going to lead the next European Commission. We don't quite have the launch of the Spitzenkandidat process, but it is also true that whoever is going to be the next president of the European Commission has to get the majority in the European Parliament. So if the EPP wins again, and I hope we can do this jointly in Austria, Slovakia, and other countries, I hope we get to nominate our candidate for the next president of the European Commission. And that's also important, who is going to lead this commission. And I just want to say Ursula von der Leyen has been doing a very, very good job in difficult times. And I hope perhaps this will be an added element in terms of mobilizing people, because it does matter who decides in Brussels for you. And it does matter whether you vote, because if you don't go and vote, all of those who come and vote also decide on your behalf, and you may not like it. So I'll end it here, and I'll be happy to listen to your remarks and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have already a lot of follow-up questions to all the things that you have mentioned. We have other questions here. You can't see it online yet, but we have a packed room of people. You can also ask questions later on. You will get your chance. But maybe one of a follow-up, because I think it's the connecting one that I saw also when we talk about the possibilities of different countries, what they actually do to prevent interfering in these elections. Is there something that is jointly undertaken, or is this a task that needs to be tailor-made to the individual challenges in the different countries? Lucas, maybe can you briefly start on that?
Well, actually, the three of us, as Vladimir Bilčik has already mentioned, have been members in the Special Committee Against Foreign Interference and Disinformation, which will have some follow-up in the next mandate in terms of standing committee dealing with issues like that. And this is already part of the answer to what you have addressed. There will be a joint response. But the joint European response that's also recommended by the special committee, even Vladimir Bilčik was our coordinator, so our speaker, our head in this committee, and I highly appreciate this work. Actually, we will have to undertake the joint response, or the joint defense even, that's the better expression for it. But it's a question for each and everybody. It's not only for each political level, this is here, local level, regional level, national level, European level, but it's for each and everybody, for media, for the outreach, for each citizen connecting with other citizens, for interaction in our societies, that we, let's say, mutually make each other aware of the difference between news and fake news, of the difference between, let's say, background information and conspiracy theories, of the difference between different political positions and ideologies of hate. And all these harmful things will be around. They're already around, and they will be even more around in advance of this election on June 9th, in our case, next year, in the beginning of June, all over Europe. And so we have to create some resilience. When it comes to the national level, I appreciate it. And as everybody knows, it's not easy for an Austrian to appreciate something from Germany, but I appreciated what the German government has undertaken in advance to the Bundestag election, a parliamentary election in Germany, with a very good campaign in reaching out to the youth, but to everybody, with gamification means and measures online to long-term before the election day, in advance to it, make people aware of the difference between fake news and news. And of course, we have to encourage media, real journalism, everything that's connected to research, not only in academia, but also in journalism. And so we will create some resilience, because we are obviously a target. As Vlado has touched on, Brexit was connected to such attacks. The election of Trump in 2016 was connected to that. France was a target, also could defend itself rather better, but still, I mean, really very irritating populistic approach achieved 40% in the presidential election in France, which is an important member state. Each member state is important. And we have seen such attacks in the past, and we will see these attacks, especially when it comes to European election. And why is that the case? Because if a power on our planet wants to weaken Europe, it wants to divide Europe. Because Europe's largest strength is unity. And the more united Europe acts, the better the shape of Europe is. And the better our options and everything that we can achieve, even in our focused issues from climate change to jobs and so on, our kind of civilization, we can uphold this more, the more united we would be. to the outside especially, and when it comes to global matters and when it comes to geopolitics. And so to attack Europe means to divide Europe, means to divide our societies, not only institutionally, this was mentioned also, which is also right, but also within our societies. The more irritation and devastation that could be created within our societies, the more those who want to attack Europe, those who want to seek for confrontation against Europe, will achieve their goals. But I don't want to hide back as Europe. We let's say generations before us have created this successful Europe due to cooperation. And cooperation must also be the idea, the approach, the philosophy of Europe when it comes to geopolitics. Our outreach must always be cooperative with other parts of the world, but at the latest in February last year, we stopped to be naive when it came to confrontation, because other parts of the world are not keen to seek for cooperation. As we do, they seek for confrontation. That's where we have to defend ourselves, and this will be extremely relevant also in advance to this election.
Thank you. Markéta, Gregorová, do you also want to chip in on the case of the influence from the outside and how maybe also you perceive it in the case of the Czech Republic?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, there is an upcoming so-called Defense of Democracy package that the Czech Commissioner Věra Jourová prepared with her team, and the Commission discussed. Now they actually postponed publishing it because of certain, I'd say, controversial directive, but I will get to that, which they first want to consult with the general public and some more NGOs before actually coming out with it. But we already had a hearing, I think last mini plenary in Brussels on that topic, which was very enlightening and interesting. Why I'm talking about it? Because it encompasses one directive and several recommendations that are going in this direction. The directive, will be regarding the financing of European organizations by external entities, which of course is very strong because, as we often say, disinformators and information manipulators are usually doing it for the business, for the money or power that they can get out of it. However, if you cut off their money sources, then there will not be that much ideological disinformators left who will be capable of doing it in a mass scale, of course, because they won't have financing for it. Of course, as you might see already by me just saying financing of organizations from external sources, this is very thin ice topic because we also want to protect our organizations that are actually doing very important, free, fair, for instance, fact-checking or watchdog work. So we don't want this tool to become a tool of bullying them into submission by certain governments or certain member states. So that's one directive which is currently blocking the Defense of Democracy package to be presented and discussed by the Parliament. However, why I'm talking about it is also the recommendations which actually go in the direction of protection the elections and already the European Parliament elections. However, I have to say that I am not that impressed by them, although in terms of content, the recommendations are going in very good direction. It's also a lot about, of course, talking to social media, maybe limiting the political advertisement that you can do a few months prior to the elections and such measures. However, as I said, and as you hear, it's just recommendations. So it has actually no legislative power, and it's just asking nicely the member states to please do something about it. And when I talk to several member states, we had them on INGE hearings very often, they always kind of hope that the EU will come up with something, that they won't have to, because it will be unpopular decision, because a lot of people will tell you, oh, you're trying to do something regarding freedom of speech during elections. Oh no, you are a censor. So they kind of do hope that the EU will do that for them. But that just means no one is doing anything because the EU is proposing non-legislative recommendations. So I'm kind of frustrated with that. And I do hope that at least some of our states will take the mantle and be a little bit brave about it. But of course, it's elections time. So it's a very sensitive topic. And from my side, it's probably just wishful thinking.
Thank you. So we are talking about the controversy that was labeled with this foreign agents similarity law that we have seen here. And Vladimir Bilčik, do you want to add to this discussion?
Absolutely. Look, I think the Commission has the full right to conduct a proper impact assessment. This is why they postponed the defense of democracy package. Now, I think we would have all liked to see it earlier. But I am also in a bit of a different camp, perhaps, than Markéta Gregorová. I would not be afraid of having some basic checks on the finances, which also are directed at foundations, and even bigger NGOs. I think we need to have a certain sense of size here, in particular because we in the European Parliament have also been confronted with foreign interference and the so-called Qatargate, where a number of NGOs and foundations may have been used as a conduit for corrupt and undue foreign influence. So I think this is something we need to assess properly. I agree we need to be careful not to attack the basic fabric of democratic institutions, including the civil society. At the same time, unfortunately, those from beyond the EU who want to destroy the EU, be it Russia, be it China, be it other autocracies, they're extremely creative in terms of how they can use the system inside the EU to pursue their own interests. I think one of the things we have learned also in this parliament, but also in terms of European politics as of the past few years, is that we need to be a lot more aware of the threats we are facing, and we need to inject more security measures and a greater security culture in the work of democratic institutions, including elections. That's a more general point, but you asked about, where Europe could be a game changer. You asked initially, is it the member states or is it Europe? Should things be tailor-made? How do we provide the answers? Now, I think what we need is we need to be vigilant about any election which takes place across the EU. I often tell visitors who come to European Parliament from my home country, Slovakia, the European Parliament is the Slovak Parliament, because we decide on so many things which affect the citizens directly in Slovakia. Just like I say, the Slovak Parliament is also one of the many European parliaments, because without its vote and approval, you don't get some decisions on European legislation, as the Parliament holds the government to account back home, as it does in any other member state. It's impossible to separate the EU institutions from the member states, because we are in one big political system. And of course, if there is resistance from member states to have far-reaching measures, it's difficult for the European Union to go along any far-reaching measures, because they need approval in the member states as well. And this is the nature of European politics. And it's also important to, I think, explain this to people in terms of what we do and what we can realistically provide. But when it comes to safeguarding against foreign influence, I think Europe not only can, but must be the answer. When it comes to the spread of disinformation online, it's only European legislation, such as the European Digital Services Act, together with the code of practice on fighting disinformation, which can make a difference. This is not about taking down content. This is not about erasing things. This is not about telling people what they can write on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or whatnot. This is rather about the basic business model and the working of algorithms of the online platforms, whereby when there is major disinformation, it doesn't spread at the expense of facts and verified information. Unfortunately, this is happening too often, and it's happening too often in the political campaigns. And here, only European legislation, only European rules can make a difference. and I hope they will make a difference. Again, when it comes to protecting and safeguarding the quality and independence of the media space, which is so crucial for free and fair campaign, I think it's important that we are now working in the European Parliament on the European Media Freedom Act. Again, this will be a baseline for some basic principles what defines quality, independent and free media at the level of public broadcasters, at the level of private media, where, for instance, we need, I think, a lot more transparency when it comes to the ownership and the final beneficiaries of this media. You know, coming from the Czech Republic or Slovakia, we could really talk endlessly about this. When a prime minister in a country owns a lot of the media, it is a problem. And again, it's not just a problem in our region. You know, we've seen in other countries in the past. These are important measures, and I think this is where Europe can make a lot of difference. Also, when it comes to party financing, for instance. Now here, I think we need to do more also at the European level, and yes, I agree, we need to go beyond recommendations or soft rules, and just we need to make sure that we don't have political parties. And I think in all of our 3 countries here, we've had experience with this, where Russian Federation, the Kremlin funds different political actors who then ran for EU elections. I think this is unacceptable. And this is all we are trying to not only map out in the European Parliament, but also set a good baseline and good rules. And I hope the Defense of Democracy package, when the Commission comes up with it, will help us to get more ready for the European elections.
Thank you very much. I would ask one more question and go through the reverse order, and then I'll turn to the audience. So get ready for this. We've talked a lot about the electoral process in the respective member countries and the challenges for election. I would like to ask now, especially with regards, if I look into the room, there's at least 7 EU member countries sort of represented. If I see this, how do you see, and I know that the European Parliament has always been very pro transnational lists and bringing the possibility to use a more, so to say, cross-national electoral aspect into it. How do you see the future development with regards to also the challenge of participation? Would actually a openness and Europeanization of it lead to more participation, or is it?
Sorry, yes or no question.
Or is it something that will not? Okay, Lucas says no. Maybe we'll have you explaining why you think no at the end, and we'll start with Vladimir Bilčik. In that case, what do you think about?
Look, this is a huge topic, and I'm also working on the Committee for Constitutional Affairs, and we've had endless discussions on this. I'm in Lucas Mandel's camp here. I don't think the transnationalists are the answer. Also, we will not have transnationalists in the upcoming European elections. We will conduct the elections as we conducted them last time around. I think, and let me just, I'm approaching this issue with an open mind. Could I imagine sometimes 50, 100 years down the road, we could have transnationalists? Probably yes. Could I see them beneficial at the moment? No. If you have such a low turnout as we do in a number of countries, and also if you have a sense of the polity, the single electoral district as we have in Slovakia, as you have in Austria, for instance, it would be very difficult to organize the transnationalists and to see any added value for voters. It would also, I think, create a bit of a disbalance inside the European Parliament. At the moment, every MEP has the same rights, the same powers, and it's really up to our respective abilities to pursue the political aims we want to pursue inside the House, across the political aisles and the groups, also inside our respective political groups. And I think that's good, that's fair. Every mandate counts. If we had different lists, you might have very different races with very different conditions, and you might have two types of MEPs in this House. Because who would be on the transnational list? How many Austrians, Slovaks, and Czechs would make it, as opposed to how many Germans, Spaniards, Italians, Poles. I'm just making a distinction here between the larger and the smaller countries here. And this is indeed one of the power bases of the division of power when we decide the composition of the European Parliament at the moment. It is proportional to the size of the countries. That is the rule which we have set out. And I think moving away from that, we are not in a condition to do that. So as a convinced European federalist, in kind of the classical sense, I think we need to really stick to the principle that we have the member states as the constitutive parts of the EU and also the EU elections for the moment. And in that sense, we need to respect also certain proportionality here and principle of the free mandate, which is also fairly distributed across the member states. So I don't see an added value in this. I don't see an added value in terms of the campaign for the moment. If you ask me the question in 50 years' time and I'm still going to be around, maybe I will change my mind if Europe looks a bit differently. But I think right now we need to safeguard what we have achieved in Europe. It's going to be a tough fight next year.
Thank you very much. But wouldn't it make actually the votes more equal in that case, Markéta, Gregorová?
I'm sorry, I wanted to answer the previous question. Now I'm kind of confused.
No, I'm just trying to build a bridge to whatever you are going to say. And I'm just wondering if it wouldn't make it more equal in the sense if every vote counts similar when transnationalists are elected in comparison to the different sizes of the countries, the different seats that countries have, and also with regards to the different voter turnout, how many votes do you need until one seat is actually elected? But please.
Yes, but that would be very. Sorry. Yes, that would be technically very difficult to recount. I am very much on board with what Vladimir Bilčik said regarding that. As a fellow Eurofederalist, I am also, of course, a big fan of potential transnational lists in theory. However, in practice, now it won't really help, and it might cause even more problems, or the worst case scenario, it will just bring more votes from the already biggest countries with the biggest turnout, and the other countries such as ours, so maybe that's why we are also against it, would be again lacking behind. And that is definitely not what will help our Europeanization and of involvement of voters. I feel like what would help, and of course you will hear this repeated all over again by every sociologist, politologist, and even politicians when the elections are ahead, that people need to know why the European elections matter, why European Parliament matters, what it does. As Mr. Bilčik again said, he says to his Slovak visitors that it's also Slovakian Parliament. Yes, but do most people know that? I feel like no, maybe only those who visit Mr. Bilčik or some of us. And that's a very small portion of our populations. And this is, of course, the overarching topic whenever we discuss voters turnout, like whose job it is to bring people to care about the EU. Is it the job of the media? Well, to some portion and extent, definitely. When I'm trying to sell to media some of my work or topics or what the parliament did in the plenary week, I too often see the response, nobody will care about that, we won't air it, sorry. And I wonder, nobody will care it, but you did not air it yet. So how do you know nobody will care about it? Don't you want to try and get people used to these types of messages? Then of course it's not just job of the media, it's also job of the politicians. Here we are maybe on an intersection of both the communication of politicians in terms of just pure PR and marketing of what they communicate, but also of almost sort of disinformation approach to some information. If it's very common, if something goes wrong, the politician is so quick to blame Brussels. And although the Brussels probably had nothing to do with it, or it was transposed into legislation of the national state by the national politicians, and it was screwed up by them. So that's also quite a big responsibility of them, how they approach their own communication. And this is a little bit personal, because I am an avid hater of how commissioners are being appointed since the very beginning. There is not only no power of people over who this most important person of their country on the European level is, but there is also, to be very honest, no control and no power from the European Parliament. Yes, we have hearings with them at the beginning. However, there is always, or very usually, only one person for the position. And I've never heard a conversation being based on the content, like, oh, this person is not sufficient for the position, so we won't vote for them. It's always about, oh, we don't know if the country won't send us someone even worse, so we'll probably get them. How can we even approach election and appointment of the most important executive people in the European Union like that? But it is how it is. So that's my very big concern. Last point, very quick. I feel like this will be to some extent also a generational change. I do hope, at least I see it in my country. The youth is usually low in turnout when it's young. So now we can't see it yet, but they are very interested in the EU and what the EU can do for them and what the EU does for them. So I do hope that once they grow into the age when they are more prone to go to the elections and vote, they will actually turn out also for the European elections, and we will suddenly see the fruits of what we are trying to do now here, us politicians who do something, and of course the media who are already jumping on this train.
Thank you very much. Lucas, in 50 years' time, will you still say immediately no to transnational lists?
Well, I've listened carefully to your question, Bastian, and your question was whether the turnout will be higher if there will be a transnational list. And here my response is really clearly no, because the turnout will not be high, it will even be lower. It would be lower with the transnational list due to the already mentioned reasons. And I want to add some reasons, but I also want to add some visionary approach for the future election law. Brussels seems to be far away from people. That's why Vladimir Bilčik tells his visitors groups, this is also a Slovakian parliament. What I always do, I did it yesterday, I had a group of headmasters, today I had a group of young entrepreneurs in the Brussels parliament, and I mean in the seat in Brussels. And I always say to them, you're not guests in this house, it's your house. The house of it's not something you visit and somebody else is acting there or something, but you're only acting on behalf of the very citizens of our constituencies. And this is what I really believe in, that parliamentarism is a huge innovation of mankind. It's also not be said very often, but that's true. It's like, I don't know, like printing books. It's an innovation of mankind, of humanity. And parliamentarism depends, among other things, on constituencies of whatever kind. In the United States, democracy is not working in each respect very well there due to reasons which are similar to reasons here. And they are very much looking to the regulation Vladimir Bilčik has mentioned when it comes to social media and so on after January 1st, 2021, when these riots took place on Capitol Hill. But structurally, it's pretty developed, as we know, and deeply rooted. And each member state, each state of the United States has a different number of representatives in the US Congress. They send their people there, and nobody would recommend to have a federalist or something. That's not the point. In the Senate, each country has worked the same in terms of seats as well as in the European Council, as we know. What I can imagine, not for this election, but for the future, is constituencies cross-border. IDM would be the right place to develop it, because we are dealing with, let's say, these homes of people originally. Even if it could happen that Vlado and me would be competitors, then I don't like this idea. But cross-border constituencies, which will still be, let's say, considered by people as a broader region, what they would consider as their home, could be something, not for 2024, but for the further future, with all the issues we will have with languages and other things and national parties and so on. But okay, this is something we should visionary talk about. Also, as a federalist, I agree with that. What has been said regarding this. What will increase the turnout, especially for let's say reliable, reasonable candidates of various parties? And I always say to visitors groups and to others, we have a broad range of reasonable political groups in the European Parliament. Only the far right and the far left extremists I would not count in here. But there are many reasonable colleagues in the Green Party, the Socialistic group, the Renew group, the Liberals, the Conservatives, and our group as well. So this is how we work together. And what could increase the turnout here is more politically than structurally, in my view. That's leadership. What we face absolutely not only at European level, on each level, is a lack of leadership. And this might be the only area where I maybe have a slightly different view than Bilčik has mentioned on the European Commission, but I don't want to make it ad hominem. Everybody's trying to do a good job in times of crisis, including the Commission's president. But I highly appreciated what, for example, Madame Urschitz quoted about our Parliament's president, Markéta. That's the way I understand leadership. Talking to people, serving people, being interactive, being responsive, especially in times of crisis, being physically present. So these are things our Parliament's president, Markéta is doing, and that's what I see lacking. And it's even more. Leadership is serving. Leadership is to serve people, but also to take some risk. Not only to look after polls, opinion polls, election predictions, and so on. This time is over. We live in times of crisis. Vlado has mentioned that nobody can predict exactly what will be the issue the day before the election. In no country you can predict that today, but let's say to make understood, to explain where you want to go to, and to reflect on that with citizens, and to go there then, even if it means to take some risk, as Helmut Kohl has taken risk for the reunification of Germany, as François Mitterrand has taken risk for allowing that, as I don't know, Lech Wałęsa has taken risk, Václav Havel has taken risk, you name it. This is deeply rooted also in European history, and this is what I would call leadership, and this is maybe what could be attractive beyond this populistic hate and conspiracy theory and division approaches, which will really harm Europe if we let them and if we allow them to happen.
Thank you very much. So now the possibility to also debate with our wonderful guests. And if you do so, please tell us briefly who you are, and also maybe the country you're coming from, to show the diversity we have in the room. Are there any questions? Yes, please. Can you come a bit in front so that our guests online also can see you? Feel free to use the wonderful IDM board here. Yeah.
I'm Felix Meyerhofer. I'm from Austria. I'm retired. I'm a bit surprised about the efforts which you want to make, because I understood that fake news and fighting them is censorship. That's really censorship, and we should be very careful to start with that, because once we start with that, we are ruining democracy. That's for me clear. The second thing is, I don't see why we should exclude somebody like the far left or far right.
They exclude themselves just for you.
Okay, why we exclude them? I think it's a problem that they exclude themselves, but that we exclude them, I think is completely wrong. And they were elected. So we can't exclude these parties. They were elected, there are people behind them, votes. So we have got to talk to them. Can't say we don't want them and we want to exclude them. So this, I don't think that we will be able to increase the numbers of voters by saying the people who will exclude. So that's
just a common another question to someone.
Sorry,
Those were just two comments, and you don't have a specific question to someone.
whoever wants.
Okay. Does anyone want to comment on the?
Very brief.
Yes,
Very
please.
brief. And my colleagues may, let's say, confirm what I will say now. It's not about excluding them. If we negotiate on something, no matter what it would be, they don't show up, okay? That's the system how the European Parliament works. If there is a file we negotiate on, each political group sends one representative. It's called rapporteur or shadow rapporteur. The extremists from left and right do not send anybody. And if they nominate somebody, this person doesn't show up. So this is just daily life in European Parliament. I'm happy nobody of us claimed that we would exclude them. No, we don't exclude them. They exclude themselves. And of course, voters are behind them. And these are the people we want to approach. We also serve these people, of course, and we also have this responsibility. The word response is included in the word responsibility to respond to them, to their concerns, to their fears. We are living in times of increasing fears. So this is what I want to emphasize on this maybe or very Austrian misunderstanding, because in Austria we always have discussion of total sanitaire or not and so on. But it's not about exclusion; it's about parliamentary work and with whom you can deal and who is not even showing up.
I also did not understand in our discussion that there would be an exclusion. But is fake news, banning fake news censorship? Vladimir Bilčik, please feel free also to comment, of course, on the first part of the.
Thank you very much. No, that's I appreciate the comments. Let me just say two things. One is anyone can run in the European elections, and anyone can succeed as long as there is a level playing field for everyone. This is the thing. We all have to have a baseline, and we have to have free and fair campaign and free and fair elections. And I agree with Lucas. You know, those who are extremists, those who come to the European Parliament with anti-European positions, they are not here to be a constructive part of solutions. This is not only a house of democracy, but it's also a house where we look for consensus. All three of us may have different views on things, but ultimately the EPP, the Greens, the Socialists, Renew, the major democratic pro-European groups, they want to find a solution and agree. Unfortunately, the extreme right and also at times the extreme left, you know, they just want to undermine what we are trying to do. Second point on censorship. This is not about censorship, and what we're doing with the European Digital Services Act is not about censorship. What we're doing with the Code of Good Practice on Disinformation is not censorship. We are not building any Ministry of the Truth. We are not trying to take down content, except when that content is illegal. We have the principle: what is illegal offline should be illegal also online, and I'm fine with that. You know, if we say child pornography is illegal, we shouldn't spread it. If we say, you know, denying Holocaust is illegal, we shouldn't spread it. If we say propagating Nazism is illegal, we shouldn't spread it online. So that content should not be spread and should be taken down. In terms of the fight against fake news and disinformation, the problem is that today people get most of their daily news from the online platforms. And it's the online platforms which have the power and full control in terms of what's shown on your respective platform, in your mobile phone, in whatever device you use. And all we want is to have a regulation which gives free speech a fair chance also online, which means basically that verified facts, information which is, you know, splendid journalism has the same chance to get to the readers as hoaxes, dangerous fake news, and outright lies and disinformation. We are not saying that these things should be taken down. We are saying that there should be a clear algorithms and also accountability of the platforms in terms of what they do, how they spread the content, and what they do to fight against the excessive spread of fake news and disinformation. This is what we have built into the Digital Services Act, and I think this is the way forward. It's about adjusting the business model and also having a certain degree of control. One last sentence. It's a bit like regulating the banking sector or any big sort of branch of modern industry. I think we need to do this also when it comes to the online space, because it has public responsibility. It affects our democratic choices. And I think we need to put some balance in there. And that's what we are doing. This is not censorship. It's, I think, healthy regulation of the space, which needs to remain, which must remain pluralistic with a fair chance for free speech.
Thank you very much. Markéta, Gregorová.
Yes, Vladimir Bilčik said most of what I would also say and add. So let me just also add that if you put it like, is banning fake news censorship, the thing is that we are not banning fake news. We are trying to uncover who are the willing and knowing creators of the fake news. Then we want to find out why are they doing it, and if they are doing it with malicious intent, such as undermining our democratic societies and our elections, then we want to have the power to, for instance, sanction them, which currently we do not really hold. So it's really not about random people sharing something on Facebook. It's never about an individual. It's about being able to tackle the structures that based their whole either ideology or business on creating and disseminating dangerous information and disinformation. So I do hope that this also clears it up.
Thank you very much. So, where else? Yeah, Sylvia, please. Then we have two more. Let's stick it to brief and concise questions addressed at people, please.
So my name is Vladimir. I'm a trainee here at IBM, and I'm from Italy. And I was just wondering before with my colleague how we perceive the presence of the EU in our everyday life. So how people feel involved in actually going to vote. And I was wondering how should government work on that, like increase the participation on that and make people feel that in their own lives every day, and if there should be a joint European action for that.
Thank you. Who wants to take it? As it was not directly directed at someone.
Can I just say one sentence? I think all governments should give credit to the EU and European solutions where the credit is due. If that becomes the starting point, I think the citizens will understand how much Europe does for them, and also how much the governments do for them together with other Europeans. This is often not the case. I think this would be a good starting point.
Thank you.
Maybe one thought what I always try to emphasize. If we try to spread the message that it's good to have institutions in Brussels and it's good to have unified Europe, which is the case, which is true, sometimes it's not, let's say, it doesn't approach the heart of people. It approaches the head, the brain, not enough. And maybe this is not the full solution, but one part of the solution is to make understood it's not the EU that has created what we have, our civilization, our wealth, our opportunities, our freedom, our peace, as long as we have peace and where we do it in Europe, but it's the generations before us, generations of Europeans before us. My grandmother, your grandfather, my mother, my father, they have created a different sphere than Europe ever was before. And let's say, and we have inherited something, and now we have it in our hands to develop it. So the full response to that, but it's a thought that seems to be relevant because it's closer than institutions in the process.
Thank you. So we have two more questions that I saw. Yeah. Please.
We're live in the plenary here, colleagues. But more speaking time.
I honestly don't know that. So I'm Alexander Harrat. I'm president of a small party in Europe, actually, or in Austria. We're bigger in Europe than we are in Austria. I'm from Volt, Europe. I'm president of Volt in Austria for 4 years now. And I just have to ask the question because I don't often have the opportunity to ask 3 members of parliament. What I missed so far and what really, I don't know, urges me to also be political. And don't you think one of the necessary topics for the next campaign should also be to review our political cooperation in Europe and how we work together as Europeans? That don't you sometimes, as members of parliament, have the feeling like, I mean, are we even capable with our current system to tackle these global challenges that need us to be as unified as you have claimed? And I've all heard you're European federalists, which I assume means you're for a European democracy, European Republic, whatever it means. But don't you think sometimes as members of the parliament, the current system, it's not very well designed for making unified solutions, for giving them to us? Because, I mean, I would assume as a member of parliament, I've always feel dictated by the European Council on what the policies will actually be in place. And so I feel because of all the populism arising, the next European elections, we will really have to have an honest look on how we cooperate together right now and to discuss that. I know it's not an easy topic. I know it's a topic that's difficult to sell to the heart, but I think it's the necessary one. And I just wanted to ask if you feel the same or if you feel like, okay, we still have 50 years or something.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Markéta, Gregorová, please.
Yes, thank you. I will probably have more radical ideas than my colleagues, but we will see. Maybe I will be surprised pleasantly. I do agree with your point of view. It's very natural that I do agree with you because pirates are inherently very similar to Volt in many aspects of this like approach to how member states operate. I think that the problem, which you kind of touched upon by mentioning Council, is that the European Union sounds like, I don't know, a project or sounds like an entity in itself, but in the end, it is still a platform for member states. The member states have a very strong say in the Commission. And naturally, the member states' governments are nominating their commissioners. Of course, that then on paper, the commissioner should represent the interests of the whole project of the EU, not of the member state. But is it really always happening? Then we have the Council, which not only is represented by the member states, but also is the least transparent of all. So there can be really going on whatever the member states want, and then they can bring whatever back to their country they need to say, which is also a problem. And then I even now still meet so many MEPs who are absolutely fine with claiming, I am elected representative for my country. I hate it. I don't know if they read it, but they should represent all people of the European Union. Of course, naturally, they should represent all people ideologically and in terms of values compatible with them, but in the whole European Union, not just in their country. Just because we do not have yet a transnational list and we are each voting our own national parties and members, doesn't mean that once you are elected MEP, you shouldn't represent all the people in the EU. And this is not happening. So from my perspective, the problem is that the member states have still too much say in the whole EU, although we do pretend like it's balanced, like we have this nice triangle of power of Commission, Council, and Parliament. I don't see no triangle. I saw it in my studies, in European studies on my university. I never saw it in practice. So I do feel like that would kind of resolve the problem if we addressed this.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I agree more with Markéta Gregorová than you would think, but I want to make some points on it. First of all, beside everything structurally, which is for a major part true, European Parliament remains the most vibrant political arena on earth, I would say. Really, we can represent it and we can emphasize that, and we can, let's say, also make. Secondly, of course, I feel addressed because you talked about members of European Parliament as well as Vlada is one. Of course, I speak on behalf of the EU in its entirety. When I'm going to Japan or Korea or Middle East or Western Balkans, as also Vlada is doing from time to time, by the way. And this is when you are engaged in foreign politics, geopolitics, foreign affairs, security, defense, then you have some obligation, as we all know, for the European Parliament or for some body, for some committee, for some delegation, or as a rapporteur for some file to speak on behalf of EU. But I would say the other way around. The reason why you are here today, Madame Gregorová, and why Vladimir Bilčik is here today is that Sebastian Schäfer wanted to ask what's the situation like in Slovakia in advance to the European Parliament elections, and what's the situation like in the Czech Republic, and maybe also what's the situation like in Austria. And this is fine. This is okay. This is because we represent the people who have elected us and who also deserve some representation. The Slovaks deserve a specific representation on European level, and Vlado is providing it, and also his colleagues from Slovakia of all groups. And the same is true for the Czech Republic. So I don't see the contradiction. This is what I wanted to say. Also as a federalist, which I also see myself as, and to not be too long for this question. Yeah, we need structural reforms. We need, for me, let's say the overall motto, the theme for it is to create Europe with more strength to the outside and more freedom to the inside.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I just see that both are writing in the chat that they.
I'm happy you interrupted me because it would be very difficult to explain what I mean. That's
maybe I'm very sorry that we have to wrap up, because I think we could continue for a couple of more hours, because it's been a very interesting part. Let me just have one very quick last question to all three of you, because it has been mentioned, Spitzenkandidaten. Do we need that? Because, I mean, we can't go into the depth what the challenges of that system is. Just a very brief answer, just like Lucas did when I asked about transnational lists. Yes or no? Vladimir Bilčik.
Yes, we do. And I think this is something which the European Parliament has worked on hard, and I think in the end we will get some Spitzenkandidaten in these elections. And I think that's also important for the political discussion in terms of the voters. It's one aspect to explain, you know, you're electing MEPs, you're also electing the future head of the European Commission, and that is important. It does matter. And thank you very much for splendid questions. Thank you very much for the invitation. I do have to leave in a minute or so. I have another meeting at 8, and it's been a real pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Markéta, Gregorová.
Thank you. Yes, I also do think that we need, or I will appreciate if we have a Spitzenkandidaten system, however, with one condition, which is that then the Commission will actually respect it and use it. Otherwise, we will be a factor of ridicule from all the voters. So yeah, Spitzenkandidaten, but only if it works. And also thank you very much for the invitation. I will also need to leave for another call at 8. This is never-ending job, I see, for all of us. But thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And Lucas.
So my response is also yes, in the sense of a more transparent, democratically legitimized leadership of the EU, meaning the European Commission.
Thank you very much to all three of you. It has been such a pleasure. Thank you for doing this despite not talking to your direct constituents. And just to sum up what also has been mentioned, a couple of years back when I was doing a fellowship at Globsec, I suggested, amongst others, that we could use minilateral formats to suggest commissioners, and maybe a Slavko format could be a suggestion for a commissioner. Thank you very much for your time. You see, you have a very busy day if you're an MEP. I think we respected a bit. Round of applause from the audience to all of you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. And it's
Good evening
super
to Vienna.
to have you online. The downside is we cannot invite you for the wine that is waiting outside. For everyone who
Cheers.
is- If you come to Vienna, stop by at Hahngasse, you're always invited. Thank you so much.
I will tell you how the wine was.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.